the abuse of the parties has come about recently. This is a relatively new thing. So as this Attorney General says, it's been a curious mix of interests for a long time that has not been abused by those who want to use it for power. I'm not saying that people coming out from the outside have seen it that way, but there is this belief that we can't have Democrats, we can't have liberals, we can't have people who don't see things the way that I see things in power in this state. We've never been like that.
Greg Casey, you're back.
I am. Thanks, Matt. I appreciate being asked, especially about this subject. I'm excited to talk about it.
It's a lot. I had Jake Ball and Rod Beck on, and they were both very much Commissioner Beck, and they were both very much.
I know Rod Beck well.
There you go. You know, I'm just trying to be respectful.
I know
everybody here.
No.
I also had Hiram Erickson on. He was part of the debate with Tom Luna, which was I was not able to go, but again, he came in from Rexburg, and I was able to snag him the night before.
Really well. Yeah.
And you also are for Prop 1, and you have a different perspective than other people. Obviously, Hiram spoke very specifically about the nature of the structure, and that the structure of elections and the way we have primaries right now, especially in a one-party leaning state, is pulling the state harder to the right. And he was speaking a lot about how the people running for elected office really just have to appeal to a very small portion of Republican voters that come out in the primary. And he essentially said, look, you got 20% of the voters that are Republican that vote in the primary, which means if you want to win, you really just have to appeal to 11% of those people with some message. And that could get you through the primary to the general, where you likely win as a Republican. And again, so we talked a lot about that. But again, you have a different perspective on it. Not different in that you're against Prop 1, but a different reason why you're more for Prop 1 as well. Hit me with it.
Okay. Let me start with a story.
Okay.
When I was elected to Sergeant at Arms of the U.S. Senate, one of my key responsibilities was the relocation of government in case of cataclysmic event, finding and then transporting to that undisclosed location people who could continue the operation of government Article 1, which is the legislative branch, and the courts threw in with us, so we also had Article 3. So finding a place where the leaders of Congress and the leaders of the court could go to meet with Article 2, which was the presidency, to reconstitute government. Pretty simple.
Great.
So we came up with the plan, and at 2 o'clock in the morning, we were going to exercise that plan. So the helicopters that were part of our black budget legislation flew in, and they landed on the front ellipse of the U.S. Capitol at 2 o'clock in the morning. And we, instead of having the people who were in line to run our government, we had actors playing it, or just individuals. So we get there, and the guy's there with his list of people. And I say, okay, this guy is representing the Speaker of the House. Okay, that's number 3 in line. This guy is President Pro Tem of the Senate. That's number 4 in line. This individual represents the Chief Justice. That's fine. This is the Majority Leader of the United States Senate. And the guy goes, wait a minute. Majority Leader of the United States Senate can't get on the helicopter. I said, but he runs the Senate. That's how this works. Well, not according to the Constitution, not according to federal law. That person has no seat on this helicopter. And so we actually had to sort of cancel this exercise. And I began to think, what is the proper role of the parties in our government? What are they supposed to be doing? And from a Washington, D.C. perspective, I'd look at this and I'd say, part of what's going wrong here is we've given the power that was delegated to elected officials to party officials. And they represent not the people, but the party. And so it began at that point in time. Obviously, we renegotiated the agreement with the black ops people. But from that point forward, I started doing a little bit more research as to what the proper role of the parties in our American system really are. And I think you've heard this before, but I do want to revisit this, what George Washington said about this. He says, excessive partisanship serves always to distract the public councils and enfeeble the public administration. It agitates the community with ill-founded jealousies and false alarms, kindles the animosity of one party against another, and foments occasionally riot and insurrections. So, that sort of set understanding that I have been a lifelong conservative Republican activist. I didn't sit on the sidelines. I've been active in defeating Democrats up and down because I was a party activist. So that began a long education for me as to what I thought the party's role should be. So that brings me to this question, and that is Prop 1. Prop 1 to me is basically...
May I ask a quick question? I'm sorry, because I know the question was about Prop 1, and here I'm interrupting you right as you're getting after it. When you're talking about the Senate Majority Leader and how the individual guarding the helicopter is like, that guy can't get on because he's not the elected official, and you were saying, but we've structured our government around this person. What you're saying is that the Majority Leader in the Senate, just because he's the Majority Leader of this party, has now in our functional U.S. government actually been given power, not from the people, but just because he represents the head of an interest group within our government. And we've actually structured our government to give that person unique power.
Bingo. And that's kind of what we're talking about here, is the proper role of a political party. And I think you hit the nail on the head, which is from the state, city, county, state to the federal government, a political party is nothing more and nothing less than an interest group. It's like the Idaho wool growers. It's like the Idaho timbermen. It's like the dairymen. They are all interest groups of like-minded people who get together to lobby for a certain type of public policy. That's all they are. There is nothing in law. I mean, I'm provided for in law. I mean, as Sergeant at Arms, I'm provided for in law. But my election is when the majority leader makes the motion and the minority leader seconds the motion, then I'm elected. So it is nothing more than a spokesman for the party. Now, what is the long-term result of that? And we were facing the long-term result of that. The two oldest people to ever run for president of the United States, Biden and Trump, were running against each other, and there was very little enthusiasm on the part of the Democrats or the Republicans for a repeat of that election. And you could see it. But that is a result of those people who are in power in the party making those decisions. And that's not right. That's not the way the system was set up. By the way, to further make that point, I have here in my little hand, this is a copy of the document that was executed on April 6th, 1789, electing George Washington president of the United States for the first time, and John Adams as vice president. It was a ranked voting system. Ranked voting. There's no party affiliation on there.
Let me get a picture of this. Let me get a picture. I'll pop it up on the screen here and bring it down.
Okay. Right. There's no party affiliation on there. It is he, she, or it who gets the most votes wins the presidency. He, she, it, or they who gets the second most votes gets to be the vice president. That's the way it was set up when we originally, until the 12th Amendment was passed, which created our current system. But it was based on the Electoral College and how many electoral votes each person got and blah, 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 blah. But it was a ranked voting system by the Electoral College. So when somebody says that they oppose this because it's dangerous or it's new or, the fact is that's not true at all.
Wow. Okay.
So I just wanted to give you a little bit of that background so that, people understand
that ranked voting has a long, rich history with the founding of our country.
Yeah, this is not new.
Okay, so you were saying, I interrupted you, Prop 1.
Okay, so here's Prop 1. It's a lengthy document. It has to amend a lot of different things in Idaho law. But here was the part, I was discussing this with some people who are against Prop 1. Here is the part that they really don't like, and it's in the long title of the ballot. It says, candidates could list any affiliation on the ballot, but would not represent political parties and need not be associated with the party they name. Now, this is where everybody gets upset, because if you're for Prop 1, what you're basically doing is saying, We ought to open this up to invigorate and enlarge the participation in the political process, right? You can say you're a Republican if you want to say, if you are a Republican. You can say you're not a Republican, but you can run in the same race as those who are endorsed by the political parties. So why are we so afraid to open up, to increase the number of people who can participate and increase the robust participation in our political system? And here's why. The parties have become, like any interest group, the interest group represents the interests of the people who belong, right? They don't tell people what they should believe. They represent what those people believe. It's not about control. It's about encouraging policy involvement. That's what it's always been about. What we have now is we have parties who believe it's about control. You know, the first thing you hear coming out of Washington is who's going to control the House? Who's going to control the Senate? You know, how can there be 100 senators with such diametrically opposed ideas as 49-51 as we have right now? It is because, and I have been there, I've watched this. Some new guy shows up, some new gal shows up to Congress, and the first thing they do is you have to read what's in the Republican Policy Committee document, or you have to read what's in the Democratic policy. And anybody who dares to be independent is ostracized by the party because it's about control. And here's what we have, I think, in Idaho, too. We have the same problem. The party has come to the erroneous conclusion that it's about control. I have to control what Republicans think. No, you're supposed to represent what Republicans think. If I'm a legislator, and I'm elected by the people as a Republican, your job as a party is to represent me, not represent you.
So this is a really interesting perspective, as I haven't really considered it like this. And again, I'm newer to politics. I'm a younger guy. I would like to say I have been an advocate for a long time, but I haven't been. So the idea is genuinely, hey, look, we 100 people. We call ourselves Republicans. We would like to form an interest group around our beliefs. And
Correct.
that interest group, then the top of that organization is, hey, we reflect the beliefs of our members. Similar thing you're talking about with elected representatives, which is, hey, if I'm elected as a Republican, this party should be reflecting what I see and understand in state law, what I see and understand from my constituents. This is what these people are telling me. But instead, you're saying it has been reversed in that the party now that was supposed to reflect the elected representatives and then, of course, the individuals is now dictating to these people how they should think and act, which is where you got the censures that were getting doled out by the party to elected representatives.
Correct. So the party is acting as if it's a control mechanism rather than a representative mechanism. Remember, we're in a representative system of government. And so people elect people to represent their point of view. That's the whole point. And the party, rather than dictating what those policies should be, sure, they should be policy documents and they should make recommendations on this and recommendations on that. But the party's job is not to dictate to a duly elected representative of the people what they should think, or which party, or what label they have. What really gets me about the people's opposition to Prop 1 is they don't want to have a non-perfect, non-qualified Republican running for office. But who are they to judge whether or not that person is not representing the people? And that's what I think the problem is. I think this is a great idea because it's going to, as I believe, it's going to blow the doors off of this control. What it does also do, though, is it hands back to the party the ability to endorse and talk about why the candidate that they endorse is better than the other candidates, rather than just saying, well, that candidate is bad because they don't believe like we do. And it opens up the discussion more.
And to that end, there was a discussion with Commissioner Beck about, or an emphasis where he was saying, hey, you shouldn't be able to pick the opposing team should not be able to pick my team's quarterback, right? And again, I heard that and I was like, initially, I'm like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Later, a couple days later, I was thinking, yeah, but that person's quarterback theoretically could now be in charge of me. So like, shouldn't I have, I mean, like the team analogy doesn't work. It only works if you consider everyone in the state as like two distinct different teams combating against each other.
Well, and it's not about the team per se as it is about the idea that the team represents. Right. You know, when I first worked for Steve Sims way back then, and I was considered way too conservative at the time. Most people would say maybe I'm a rhino, but I remember you win on ideas. We compete in the marketplace of ideas. It's not about forcing people to think your way. If your quarterback is good, make me believe it.
Well, this is what I was kind of getting to with the team, which is, hey, wouldn't the Republican Party still have the ability to pick the quarterback that they endorse?
Yeah.
Put whatever resources or energy behind that, pamphlets, door knocking, whatever it is. Like, hey, is there anything in Prop 1 that would stop, say Prop 1 comes to pass, and is there anything that would stop the Idaho Republican Party from backing individual Republican candidates, distributing resources to them, encouraging their conversation or their...
No.
So it's not that it's stopping somebody from picking a team.
Right.
Even if we stick with that analogy, which, you know, it's imperfect, fine. But even if we stick with that analogy, you still get to pick your quarterback.
Sure. And you get to endorse them, but you can't restrict the other players on other teams from playing in the primary. You know, if I want to run as a Republican and they decide I'm too moderate, I can't imagine anybody deciding it. But let's assume they decided that, then that means I couldn't run as a Republican. They want to own the brand and they want to, well, no. You know, I want to run because I believe my ideas are better than yours.
Can I ask you something? Because this is what I haven't really understood is, if Prop 1 comes to pass and we have this open primary where everybody gets put into a thing and you can put an R, you can put an L, you can put a C, you can put whatever you want next to your name. You'll have certain parties that endorse and fund and support individuals. Correct. And there's this real competition of ideas and fighting for actual votes, which is like, hey, now if you're a Republican and even if you're endorsed by the Republican Party, you have to appeal to a broader audience, not just your Republican voters. Why even have a primary? Like, what is the function of the primary? Is it to reduce down the number of people that then clog the general? So it's like, hey, if we have 16 people that are running in the primary, we can't put all 16 of those people in the general. It'd be too confusing.
Right. And I think at the end of the day, what you want to do is you want to elect somebody that has the majority of the votes. And so the idea of the primary, the way that it's set up is you can all run and the top 4 get to go on and play in the general election. So it is a way of winnowing out. But it allows people to participate on an even basis with what may be considered the more major candidates. Nothing wrong with the Republicans saying we're going to support this candidate, and if that happens to be the major candidate, then that's great. Then do whatever you want to do. But don't say to somebody else you can't run because you're not a good enough Republican. Or you can't vote because you haven't registered as a Republican. If you're an elector in the state of Idaho, you should be able to vote. Now, here's something else I want you to think about. So I asked a former attorney general. I said, okay. And a former attorney general not named Jim Jones. So I said, all right, let's just say I'm not considered a good enough Republican. I can't imagine that would ever happen, but just say that was the case. And I couldn't participate then because they have adjudicated me as being not a good enough Republican. I haven't, so I can't play in their party, but I'm a taxpayer. All right. So the Republican, and I love this. So the Republican and Democratic primaries are paid for by the taxpayers, but they're restricted who can participate by the parties. And so you got the party leadership today saying, you can't participate because you're a D. You can't participate because you're an independent. You can't participate because you're not a good enough R. Yeah, but I'm a taxpayer. So why am I paying to not participate in a primary? And so it was an interesting dichotomy. Can a disenfranchised voter, therefore, file suit against the state for not allowing me to participate in an election that my tax dollars paid for? Interesting concept, right?
That is That is a perspective I had never considered.
Right. So,
And like, I very much appreciate from an education standpoint, people talk frequently about, older individuals who no longer have kids in the school district or, never had kids anyway. Right. And they get a say in school board, right? They're like, look, my tax dollars are going to this. I want to be part of the school board member election. I want to be part of the direction that this school district is taking because I'm a taxpayer.
And they are not opted out. They're not prevented from voting in that thing because they're not a member of a interest group. All right. So this is an interesting. So I asked this former attorney general this. I says, okay, and this is his answer. The primaries have always been a curious mixture. I love that word, a curious mixture of public and private interests. Without more statutory direction or limitations, I don't see how any voter can claim an enforceable right to either participate contrary to party rules or decline as a taxpayer to fund the adventure at all. The so-called open primary, which we're talking about here, serves the same purpose and the same function and will also have rules about filing and running. They just won't be delegated by the legislature to any political party. Yet some will claim or even earn party membership or endorsement. So what this says is we have this curious relationship that has been designated by the legislature. We're going to give the parties the ability to decide who runs and who doesn't run and how these primaries will be conducted. And we, the taxpayer, are going to have to pay for what the parties decide. So what this attorney general is basically saying is, this basically says, no, the legislature is no longer going to delegate the parties to be in charge. The legislature is going to say the state is in charge. And these are interest groups who have an interest in these elections, and they are allowed to participate, but they can't call the shots. What more do you want? Returning the power of decision by the legislature to take the parties out from making that decision. That's exactly what I think needs to happen. And when I look back at the study that I've done over the last decade or so on the power of the parties and the corruption of the system by that power, I see that as being, it's consistent. We need to make the party about policy, about representing people's interests, not accumulating power.
Look, I moved here, and I don't make any qualms about this. I moved here because I thought it was a great place.
Still is, yeah.
Right. No. I'm not saying my opinion has changed. It is a great place. And back then I was like, that looks like a great place. I mean, I'm raising 3 children. I have a wife. I'm like, this is the place I want to be. And I have heard some people say, look, you moved here because it was great. Why would you be interested in changing it? This is naturally the number one critique that anybody has of somebody who moved here and has any idea about, voting one way or another. And I'm not saying that I'm arguing with people saying I'm for or against this. I'm saying that the criticism is, hey, it's great already. Why change that? Right? Like whatever the system is, it has obviously produced positive results that enticed you and your family to move here. So what are the results that this system, our existing system, has produced that you feel are objectionable or need to change?
Well, for the longest time, parties fulfilled the role as they're supposed to fulfill the role. We had a Democratic senator and a Republican senator. We had a Democratic governor and a Republican lieutenant governor. We had, and vice versa. We always had mixed election results, more about the person, more about the policies than it was the party. And that has been sort of our success all the way along, whether it was Cecil Andrus and John Evans or whether it was Don Samuelson and Jim Risch or Butch Otter. We went back and forth. We always had this. Yeah, sure. There was always fights between the party. And, I can think back into the 60s when you had some old ranchers, ones were a Democrat, one was a Republican. But that's the way we've always been. It's always been independent. The abuse of the parties has come about recently. This is a relatively new thing. So as this attorney general says, it's been a curious mix of interests for a long time that has not been abused by those who want to use it for power. I'm not saying that people coming out from the outside have seen it that way, but there is this belief that we can't have Democrats, we can't have liberals, we can't have people who don't see things the way that I see things in power in this state. We've never been like that. And so this is a relatively new phenomenon. with people coming in who want to somehow make this a bastion of one policy, one party. And we've never been like that. So what we were that makes us special is what I think Prop 1 is about. I think it's about taking that back, as this Attorney General says, taking it back, the legislature making the decision to give it back to the people rather than the parties.
And again, you're saying with people coming in, trying to make this essentially a monoparty state. Do you think it's literally that the people moving here are doing this? Or do you think that when you say people coming in, do you mean like, is that literally people moving here, or is it literally new politicians and new individuals coming into the fight that want to make it a single?
I think a lot of people are escaping places that were liberal, with liberal tax policies or liberal
that were also monoparties.
That were also. I'm not talking about Oregon or California in specific, but let's just say. And I think they come here and they say, "This is where I want to be because I don't believe in those." And I totally understand that. You know, I mean, I don't think I could exist in California or Oregon because I'm not a liberal. You know, and I do have disagreements with a lot of their policies. And I think they come here with the best of intentions. But I think the better intention is, rather than creating a party, a monolithic party with power, it is to compete in the marketplace of ideas, to educate in the Idaho tradition of conservatism. And I'm not so sure they all know that. I totally get the fact that, you know, they're escaping someplace else where they didn't like those policies. But I also think that there's a certain national flavor right now, which lends itself to that, more of a not about the policy, but about the body, more about the individual. And parties have a tendency to do that. You know, if you look back over the history of the United States, there hasn't been just two parties. There's been a number of parties, and those parties have been led by different people with different points of view, beginning with Jefferson and Hamilton and all the way through. And so we have personalities who are now running our parties, and that's part of the shift. It's natural. I mean, I remember the McCarthy in the 50s, and we were going of course, I don't remember it very well because I was a wee child, but in my studies, I remember reading that. So I think we're just in one of those things where we have some different opinions about how these things should be run. But I do believe that this, whatever anybody else wants to say about today, tomorrow, or last week, I do believe this returns, the Prop 1 returns us to a time before we had this constant need to put power in the hands of our parties.
With competition of ideas, there's an aspect of it where people, first off, I love competition. I love sports competition. I love competition of ideas. I love debating and arguing with people. And
No kidding.
Really,
I never would have known that.
Right. And some people have said, hey, we already have competition of ideas. That's the nature of the Republican primary and Democratic primary, that you can have this competition amongst a certain group. I hadn't considered that it was taxpayer funded. I understand that. But you can have this competition within this group, and the best idea that then the group feels wins, those voters feel win, that moves on. So you do have a competition mechanism that, you know, the cream rises to the top.
Right, right. And now, and that's the way it has run, even under the current legislation. That's the way it's been run until recently, when they've decided they're going to have these evaluations of whether or not a legislator voted pure enough to qualify for the Republican platform, whether or not you've been a Republican long enough to even vote in the Republican Party, whether or not you're a Republican of a purity sufficient to go to a Republican caucus. You know, all of a sudden, this provisions that have been in law before have become abused, and they are being abused. And I've seen them abused elsewhere. Like in Congress. I mean, if you ask the American people, what do they think of Congress? It's probably a little lower than, well, it's pretty low, what they believe. And and the reason is because of the extreme partisanship between the two parties. And that's what I see happening here, the same kind of abuse. So, yeah, we ought to have a competition for ideas, and we could have kept it that way save for the fact that there's a bunch of people now who will not allow it to be that way.
When we spoke first and you came in and you talked about losing votes, the Republican Party losing votes.
Right.
You mentioned that we were at risk of losing the women's vote. We were at risk of losing the minority vote. We were at risk of losing people because the platform and the direction of the Republican Party was alienating.
Making the tent smaller.
Making the tent smaller.
Yeah.
And that was a problem to you. Do you think that is a direct... Do you think that the platform and priorities of the platform, as you describe them as pushing people out, is a direct reflection of this style of primary? Or do you think that that's just the interest of the Republican Party and has nothing to do with the nature of the primary as it exists today?
I think if the party were very interested in growing its base and expanding the tent, it would bring people in who have different ideas. They're not interested in that. They're not interested in a variety of ideas. They're more interested in the purity to the ideas they already have. Now, the problem with that is that you're limiting the number of people who are going to believe in what you believe in. If you really believe in those things, then what you should do is have a contest in the marketplace of ideas. But they're not doing that. They're not inviting people into that tent. And that's a problem. I have said to a lot of my friends that I think the shelf life, and I don't want to get in trouble, but I think the shelf life of the current MAGA-style movement is very limited, and that it will pass with the passage of Trump, win, lose, or draw, but it is a movement which is focused on limiting outside participation. So if you're a young voter, and particularly now you're seeing that if you're a young voter, if you're a Hispanic voter, if you're a multicultural voter, if you're a woman voter, you are not attracted to this party. You are not attracted to this movement. And so that movement will continue to shrink. And I don't think it's healthy for the Republican Party, certainly. And I don't think it's healthy for the discussions that we have, the political discussions that we have. I mean, right now it's either if you don't believe in me, you're evil. What? I can remember, that's not the way it's intended to be. I can remember when I first went to work in the Senate, and it was Orrin Hatch, the conservative lion of Utah, always had the most starched shirts of any human being I've ever seen. And
you say starched?
Oh God, he used to wear these collared shirts with this. I don't know how he did it, but he always was just like starched. How do you do that? And then there was Ted Kennedy, the lion of liberalism, and he would bellow on the floor and he'd carry on, and boy, they would go at it like that. Best of friends. They would leave the floor. It was about the policy. It wasn't about you're evil if you don't believe me. That's where they had the discussions. It was the parties. And part of it, quite frankly, part of it began in the Senate when we brought television cameras in. Because it didn't used to be, in the old days in the U.S. House, the way that the Republicans took over the U.S. House was we had television on the floor of the House, and we developed what we call the 1-minute speeches. I used to write them for Newt Gingrich.
I was going to say, he was like the original social media post of a 60-second hyper intense. And I actually read in a book years back about the varying style of communication that Newt Gingrich brought, because he would say, or apparently you were saying, that there would be these things like, if we have the courage to stand up for the things that we know to be our right and stop about. So without articulating any particular policy or direction, he was able to galvanize a large group of people in a 60-second clip that then was done on video.
We did.
It was the original Instagram and TikTok.
We did that on the House floor where you're allowed 1 minute.
Yeah.
Because presentations on the House floor are governed by the Rules Committee, so you just can't stand up like you can in the Senate and talk forever. So we get these 1 minutes at the end of the session, and we would load. Oh God, we had a list of really great speakers back then, and we would write these 1-minute speeches and send them out on the floor, and they'd pull the pin on the grenade and they'd throw it over the top. Well, it just used to incense the Democrats, just incensed them. So they started fighting back, but we had Henry Hyde and John Russolo, and it was back in the day when we had some real fire breathers. Well, we wrote those things to talk about public policy, to sort of say, bring it to people's attentions. And the result of that was a lot of people paying attention to these bomb throwers in the House. That was the beginning of it. Well, the Senate didn't have cameras. And so they were more of a collegial group. You know, the public wasn't going to watch them debate. You didn't stand up and point fingers at your opponent and blah, 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 all that stuff. Until a lot of those people who were part of that House uprising and got rid of Bob Michael as the Republican leader and elected Newt Gingrich as Republican leader and then elected Newt Gingrich as Speaker of the House, they went over and were elected to the Senate. Trent Lott, Connie Mack, Larry Craig. These were the guys that were doing the 1 minutes over in the House. Well, let's do the same thing over here. And we brought TV cameras into the Senate chambers, and suddenly the show was on. And I think that whole thing sort of, unfortunately, killed the collegiality of Congress.
So you are the problem, Craig.
I am.
I am probably. You are the start of the problem.
Hey, look, I wasn't alone in this. Remember, I was a small-time backroom fire-breathing grenade thrower, but that was my job. So,
right.
But I think that's part of what happened was that we lost track of what we're there to probably do, and it became more of a show for the party. And I've watched it grow over the last 2-3 decades. And I don't think it's healthy. And I think it is particularly not healthy here. I mean, it's really, and it can't last. I mean, I'm telling you, it's not going to last. So and this is in defense of Prop 1. I get what they're saying. It's too complicated. You get to 4. And I'll tell you a little story. Tell you another story.
Could I ask before your story? And I love your stories.
Okay.
When you talk about the MAGA style of campaigning and republicanism, what does that mean to you?
It is a disrespect for the opinions of others. It's calling people names. Dumb. You're a rhino. To have a difference of opinion is part of what our republic is about. We're supposed to have differences of opinion. Hello. That's why it's a republic the way that it is. I mean, think about it for a second. We created the republic so that states could have distinct different of opinion. That's what that's about. That's why you have 50 stars instead of just 1, so that we can encourage and honor differences of opinion, state to state, community to community, individual to individual. But what I see happening now is if you do not agree with me, you're evil. And and if I don't win, there's going to be a rebellion. And if I don't win, blah, 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 all hell's going to break loose. Really? That's not what this is about. If you lose, you didn't sell yourself well enough. You didn't sell your idea well enough. Get off your dead ass and go do a better job next time. But that's not what I see here.
If I may make a personal admission, and I don't give away my positions ever, but there are some ideas coming from my former state that I found so objectionable and so intolerable that I literally moved. I was living my entire life. I lived within a 5-mile radius. I grew up in Concord. I went to Berkeley. I was living in Danville.
You went to Berkeley?
I did. I did not like the town. Okay. Oh, it's so fantastic. I have to tell you something off air. Like, I was there recently, and it's like you're getting exactly what you deserve, you crazy people. But I did. I went in as a math major because I love math and science, and then I learned how to write, and I switched to rhetoric because I love communicating with people. But there are some things, especially when it comes to minors and how the state has essentially forced them as a co-parent with actual biological parents. And the state has the capacity. For instance, I'll tell you one that I find unbelievable, unconscionable. In the state of California, if you are 12 years or older, you have the right as the 12-year-old to have your public school transport you from school to reproductive health care, including abortions, medicine, all of these things, and back to school, and not alert your parents. So you could have a 12-year-old girl going with like a school counselor. This is state law to, get an abortion or something and then come home. And then she just gets on the bus and goes home to her parents. And that like, it's hard for me to even talk about that because I find that so reprehensible and so unconscionable that when you talk about, hey, if you disagree, the idea that if we have different ideas that, you know, you're a terrible person, and I agree with that like 99% of the time, but there are some things that I see coming out of some of these states that are just so horrific. And I try to reserve this visceral reaction. It's like, listen, you can't feel this way about everything. Like if you think there shouldn't be Chick-fil-A and they say Chick-fil-A can come in, like this is not the kind of time when you feel this way. But there are some things where it's like, oh my God, this is evil. Like this
Agreed.
Literally goes at the core of American. Like I couldn't imagine something worse than having the ability to take somebody's baby and take them to a reproductive clinic and not even alert them.
But I don't think anybody, I mean, few people in Idaho would disagree with what you just said. I totally agree with what you just said. I mean, but here's the problem with getting to the point where you shove everything down people's throats. It's like people say to me, why can't you support Donald Trump? Parenthetically, let me just create this, okay? I was in charge of security for the U.S. Capitol, okay? Those policemen were my guys. I know how security of the Capitol is run. I know this was not a group of innocent civilians trying to legislate or trying to make their voices known. This was an organized insurrection.
You're talking about January 6th.
I'm talking about January 6th. All right. I believe that the exiting president had something to do with it, and I have good reason to believe that. All right. Therefore, from my perspective, if for no other reason than that, I can't support this person for president. But it occurs to me that by saying and doing the things that he's doing, he is sort of forcing an opinion down people's throats. And as a result of that, policy decisions that when they were argued on the basis of the policies themselves are sometimes overlooked. I don't think that what you're talking about in California could ever happen here because the people here don't believe that should happen here. But if you ram down their throats, you not only have to believe this policy, but you have to believe these other 5 policies, and buy into our guy. A lot of people are going to say, I can't do that. So the result of trying to have power is forcing people to agree to everything that you have to say, rather than appealing to what you just said. I don't think that policy will ever pass here.
God, I hope not.
Well, if so, then we've lost control of our own state. But I don't believe that can ever happen here. But it can only happen here if we let it happen here. And part of what's happening right now is I am a good Republican. You can't say I'm not a good Republican. I'm having real problems with my party. How much of that's going on elsewhere? Do I believe that the Harris policies are better for Idaho? Probably not, but it's no longer important to me. What's important to me is I can't stand that guy. I think he's corrupt. And so, you see what I'm saying here?
Yes.
You know, you have to pick and choose your battles. And I don't think that we want to pick and choose our battles based on who has the political power. We want to pick and choose our battles on which policy is the right policy for us.
Okay. I interrupted you. I think you were going on to talk about, you were saying, let me tell you a story. I interrupted you.
What was the story I was going to tell?
I can't. Damn it, man. I screwed this up, Greg. I don't know what story you're telling. You were talking about, I think we were getting to ranked choice voting because we had talked a lot about Prop 1. Damn it, man.
I got a story to say for next time.
You got a story? I guess so. It'll probably come back to you. But the bottom line is, as we were moving up to this, you were saying that you don't think that this style of MAGA type republicanism and inflammatory comment and hating, and if we disagree, then you're a terrible person. You're also talking about 2 individuals, Kennedy and somebody from Arizona, who would get up with or Utah with a starch shirt.
Yeah,
there you go.
Orrin Hatch.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. I don't believe it has a long shelf life. It can't have a long shelf life.
Talk to me about the ranked choice voting, though, because this is one thing that people say,
Okay.
This was the nature of
Here's the
Raul
story.
Labrador's.
Here's the story.
Oh, you got your story back.
Yeah, okay.
All
So-
right. Here we go.
When I was the president of BIPAC, BIPAC was the nation's first business political action committee. So it was sort of the grandfather of all business PACs. And my clients were a majority of the Fortune 500. So I worked with some big corporations. And the goal was to create an advocacy platform that every business can use in every state. But because the Constitution provides that each state run its elections differently, you had to have components which would allow that advocacy platform that we would create and give the states to be able to work inside a particular state operation. Now, two things about that. Number one, because of that, it makes it very, very difficult for this systemic corruption to occur because every state system's different. Well, how do you do a nationwide corruption thing unless you do individual systems? The secondly was it's too complicated. People would look at BIPAC, and we had a limited staff, and they said, well, you guys can't create that. It's too complicated. It's too complicated, Well, we did. And we created it relatively quickly. And it was used, hundreds of millions of people used it, okay? So I have a member of my board at the time was the guy that invented the little tests with the pencil with a circle where you colored in with the little pencil, Remember those little tests that you used to use? Little circle?
Like Scantrons?
Yeah, like those things. He invented those things. Had a company out of Minnesota, and he made oogles of money.
I was going to say, your buddy's probably doing quite well.
Oh, yeah, he's oogles of money.
He's also responsible for like the worst days of my childhood doing standardized testing.
I'm sorry, but he died. That's what he does. Anyway, he's kind of a nerd, but he became chairman of BIPAC at one point in time. Good. And so when all this came up, he was in his motorhome someplace in California. I don't know where it was. And I started talking to him, and he says, oh, that's not a problem. I mean, being able to create a system by which ranked voting can be statistically calculated is not a problem. And people saying, oh, gosh, dang it, this is going to cost us a whole bunch of money. Well, why? You've got the ballots coming in, they're marked, they're ranked. If they're not ranked, you have it in law, what you do if it's not. It's not like a big deal. People, well, it's going to cost millions of dollars. No, it's going to cost, we're going to have to change a little bit, but it's not going to be impossible to do this. In fact, I said, you want to drive your motorhome up to Idaho and we'll get together and we'll create this system? He said, yeah, sure. After we're done fishing or whatever they're doing. See, everybody's bringing up these boogeymen, oh gosh, this ranked voting is so tough. Really? I mean, they did it in 1789. How tough can this actually be? And they talked, and then the last thing about that, and this is what I hear a lot. Well, it's going to be expensive. How expensive? How expensive is the cost of saving our republic? How expensive is it to have more people involved in robust election processing to vote for? Because if you hear people, if you just go out and talk to people, yeah, I'd vote for that person, but if it wasn't that person, I'd vote for this person. How often in conversations you hear that? You hear it all the time. People want to be able to have a real choice. And so how expensive is it? Is it twice as much as we pay for both parties, right? Both parties who we pay for. How many people participated in the Republican, what did we call those things again? Rallies that they had for, instead of a primary, they had a Republican caucus.
Oh, there you go.
How much did we pay for Republican caucuses? That 6% of the people showed up to. Huh? How much did we pay for that? What's wrong with taking that money from both political parties and putting it into a ranked voting system where more people, everybody, could come and vote for the people that they wanted to vote for? What's wrong with that? And the answer you come up with invariably is the parties lose the power to control it. Is there another reason?
Not that I have seen. And again, I'm an idiot. So I don't know, like, I believe what you're saying is, like, hey, look, this is the real issue. What I'm very curious about is we have a runoff system in Eagle, and I didn't, again, I'm an idiot. I didn't even know this was a thing. I was doing all these interviews with the Eagle mayoral candidates, and one of them said, what do you think, Matt? Are we going to have a runoff? I didn't even know it was a thing. I didn't even know he needed and then I come to find out we had 4 people running.
Yep.
And you have in the 4 people running, you have to get a 50 plus 1% of the vote. And what he was asking is, do you think anybody's going to get 50 plus 1? Again, I am a total idiot. I'm like, oh, I don't know. But I didn't even know what he was asking. So then we have 2 people that get the majority, that you take the 2 highest people. So originally we had Pierce, Pike, Ridgway, and then Captain Mark.
Captain Mark, yeah.
Ridgway and Captain Mark were the last 2, and then it was Pike.
And at that point, I knew Pike was going to win.
Look at you. How'd you know that?
I can't tell you.
Okay. It's not rigged, was it?
No, it's not rigged.
Okay.
It's if you do when we get to that point, I want to talk about polling.
Okay. So the point is that we had those 2 people drop out, and then there was another, not we, because I don't live in Eagle.
Yeah.
But I was watching this from afar and I was doing the interviews, and then you had Pike and Pierce that went into a runoff. And they both campaigned in that month between. Tons of text messages and mailers and everything were going out. They were all door knocking. And at some point there was one of the Pike obviously appealed to a broader base of people that originally voted for Ridgway and Captain Mark. Then Pierce did, and Pike won the vote.
Right.
Now, what's interesting to me is that's the ranked choice voting has been described to me as an automatic runoff, right? So they're just like, hey, look, you mark this, and then you assume if your guy doesn't win, who would you take after that? Excuse me, guy or gal. And this played out in Eagle, and I don't see anybody advocating for eliminating that system in Eagle. And this was hey, you have 4 people running, and then it went down to 2 people, and people selected from that, and you moved on. And I'm like, okay. And again, I'm not even an Eagle voter, but I didn't see people having a problem with that system.
And they shouldn't have. I think it worked out. It worked out well. I mean, that's how it's supposed to work. The person with the most votes wins. That's kind of how it's supposed to work. People say, well, is the 4-person general election basically a huge, massive primary? Well, yeah, getting to that point, you got 4 to choose from. You rank which ones you want, and you've got the follow-up primary already there. It's the same thing. Now, if you had to go back and have 4 people in the general election, and then you get it down to 2 and you had to vote again, well, I understand that. I can get that. You have to have a whole new election. You got all that infrastructure, but that's not how it is. So you're going to have a vote anyway. You're going to have a statewide vote anyway, and you're not paying for 2 parties to do it separately. So where's this massive amount of money? I suspect it is in the new machinery or something. So maybe it's a one-time infrastructure cost or something like that. But to me, it's like, it's smoke, It doesn't hold a lot of water.
Well, I am very fortunate. I believe I'm having Secretary of State Phil McGrain on to talk about. I've very much enjoyed every conversation I've had with him, and he will hopefully be coming on because the $25 to $40 million figure was something that the Secretary of State's office floated around with. Hey, we think it'll cost this much to.
My question is it going to cost that much more? Is it going to cost that much in addition to? I mean, is that including what was normally in the primaries? How much do we normally spend in primaries? Is it, a single number does not a story tell,
Understood.
So,
well, I'll be sure to ask him that. You said that you knew Pike was going to win.
Yeah.
Why?
Because both the candidates that dropped out were anti-Pierce voters. And
that makes sense.
It was from what we had seen going into the race that he had a peak, Pierce had a peak, and it was a certain particular kind of voter, and that the 3 others were actually anti-Pierce voters, and so it looked pretty certain after the original vote.
So in effect, there were just 2 candidates, and the 3 that were not Pierce were essentially splitting the non-Pierce.
But there's two that weren't. Yeah, well, true. But Pike,
Ridgway, and then Captain Mark.
Captain Mark. Yeah, they were all. There was enough. Pierce had done enough to isolate himself from certain demographic groups within the city, and these were not demographic groups that you can afford to lose. And so when you looked at that demographic group and you saw who was voting for the other 3 candidates, you realized that, and this goes to some polling data that we're seeing now, that the intensity with which they held those beliefs would indicate they're going to show up in the runoff. and it was sufficient, and it wasn't even close.
Greg, we've talked about a dump truck today. I love all the things you've said. I love your perspectives. Are we missing anything?
I don't think so. I mean, I think everybody, particularly those who are against it, ought to just kind of calm down a little bit. This is a change in how the legislature assigns responsibility for choosing those who will appear on the ballot. It doesn't, by its very, it may take away the control of the parties, but it doesn't eliminate the parties. You hit the nail on the head. They can still endorse. They can still do what they need to do. They just can't control it. And I think that's healthy for the system. So I don't think we've missed anything. I do know we can't continue on the way we are. And if you're a Republican, you should hope we don't continue on the way they are, because this tent is getting really, really small.
Gotcha. Thank you for coming in today.
My
Thank you
pleasure.
for shedding light on your position. And man, thanks for bringing in those documents. You always come loaded with like a binder. It's
I got
fantastic.
lots of fun stuff.
Yeah, it's awesome. Well, again, we'll have to do it again. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Thank you.